I never imagined I would write something like this, but after what I've been through, I feel I have no choice. My name is Matthew Carter, and on January 7th, 2024, I died. It may sound strange to say that, I know, but there is no other way to explain it. I was in a car accident and was clinically dead for 11 minutes and 46 seconds. During that time, my consciousness did not vanish. On the contrary, it awakened in a place that was not of this world. To this day, I struggle to describe what I saw and felt, but one thing I know, what happened to me was real. The last thing I remember before the accident was the sound of tires skidding on wet asphalt. My heart raced when I realized I was going to lose control, and then came the impact. The noise was deafening, twisting metal, shattering glass, and then an absolute silence. Everything went dark. There was no pain, no sound, no darkness, just an absolute void. But then, suddenly, something happened. It was as if my consciousness was being sucked somewhere. First, I felt like I was floating, weightless, without a body. Then, without warning, I found myself standing. But I was no longer in the world I knew. At first, it was hard to understand where I was. The environment around me did not seem to obey the same rules of reality. The floor beneath my feet was not solid, yet I did not sink. The air had a strange density, as if charged with something invisible. Everything around me pulsed with a golden light. But it wasn't a light coming from a sun or lamps. It seemed as if the very space around me was glowing, as if it were alive. What confused me even more was the silence. It wasn't an ordinary silence, but something absolute, almost as if every sound in the universe had been turned off. It was at that moment that I realized I was not alone. Before me, there was a figure. The instant I saw him, something inside me knew who he was. Even before any word was spoken, it was Jesus. But not like the images I had seen in paintings or movies. There was something about him that I cannot completely explain. It wasn't just his appearance, but the way his presence enveloped me. He was dressed in a simple white robe, yet his body seemed to radiate a light that did not come from the outside, but from within him. His gaze met mine, and at that moment I felt as if everything I had ever been, everything I had ever done, was exposed before him. There was no judgment in his eyes, only something I had never experienced before, a pure and absolute love, something that managed to break through every wall I hadn't even known existed inside me. My first instinct was to look away, but I simply couldn't. It was as if he were looking straight into my soul. I wanted to speak. I wanted to ask where I was, what was happening, but I couldn't. It wasn't fear that held me back. It was something different. It was as if, before him, words were unnecessary. I felt that he already knew everything, every thought, every doubt, every mistake I had made in my life. And at the same time, there was no condemnation, only an absolute truth from which I could not escape. Somehow, I understood that that moment was not a judgment, but rather a revelation. Then he raised his hand, and the moment he did so, something happened. The environment around me began to change. The absolute silence was broken by a deep sound, as if a distant thunder were echoing through all of existence. And then everything around me dissolved. Suddenly, I was somewhere else. There was no longer that golden light, nor that overwhelming peace. Now, I saw a world that seemed normal at first glance, but something was wrong. The streets were clean, the buildings were modern, people walked as they would in any big city, but there was a strange silence among them, as if everyone were too busy to notice one another. The air was charged with a sensation I could only describe as artificial. There were huge screens spread everywhere, broadcasting messages I couldn't fully understand. The strangest thing was that even without knowing exactly what they said, I felt that those words had a purpose: to control, to direct, to manipulate. Everything seemed too perfect, too organized. And then I realized this was the future. At first I thought I was just seeing an advanced future, a world that had evolved technologically. But something in that place gave me an increasing discomfort, a sense that something essential had been lost. As I walked through that city, not really feeling my feet touching the ground, I began to notice details that made me shudder. People moved as if on autopilot. Their faces showed no genuine emotions, only empty mechanical expressions, as if they were following some invisible programming. No one spoke to one another, no one laughed, no one seemed to question anything. Everything was strangely quiet, but not in a good way. It was a dead silence, a silence that screamed. Then my eyes were drawn to something that repeated everywhere, a symbol. It appeared on giant screens, in advertisements, even on small devices that people wore on their wrists and hands. It was a circle with a line crossing it, accompanied by phrases like security, progress, unification. The moment I saw it, I knew inexplicably that this symbol represented something much larger than just a government or a company. It represented a system, a new system that controlled everything, and worst of all, people. Accepted it without question. I felt that the idea behind it had been sold as something positive, as a solution to chaos, but the reality was different. There was a hidden presence behind that progress, something that couldn't be seen with the naked eye, but was impossible to ignore. As I continued watching, I realized that every interaction, every transaction, everything people did depended on something implanted in them. Some would run their hand over luminous panels to open doors. Others made payments by merely bringing the palm of their hand close to a sensor. There was no money, no cards, no passwords, only this integrated system that recognized each individual instantly. It was as if their entire lives were stored in that small implant. I saw a young woman enter a store, pick up a few items, and simply leave without speaking to anyone, without having to do anything other than pass through the exit. A discreet beep sounded as she passed, and it was only then that I noticed the mark on her skin, almost imperceptible, as if it were part of her. At first, it seemed merely an evolution of the technology we have today, something that could be seen as convenient. But I felt that there was something much deeper and more dangerous behind it. Then I looked to the other side of the street and saw a man trying to enter a building. He placed his hand against the panel, but instead of the usual approval sound, the screen flashed red. An automated voice informed him that his access had been denied. The man tried to argue, but no one paid attention to him. Some people even looked at him, but quickly averted their eyes and went on their way, as if he weren't even there. He looked desperate. Then a group of uniformed men appeared. Without a word, they grabbed the man by his arms and dragged him away. There was no resistance, no screams or protests. It was as if that sort of thing had become normal, as if no one else cared. The sight of that man being taken away without any explanation sent a deep chill down my spine. I tried to follow them, but it was as if my feet were not really touching the ground, as if I were simply being carried from one place to another without having to walk. In a few seconds, I found myself in front of a huge building with a cold, impersonal appearance. It was an immense structure without windows, with a single entrance guarded by men dressed in black, their faces hidden behind mirrored helmets. The man was pushed inside, and the doors closed immediately behind him. I didn't know exactly what was happening inside, but I felt deep in my soul that nothing good awaited those who entered. This was not a prison in the traditional sense. It was something different, something much worse. My attention was diverted when I saw another group of people, but this time they were outside the system. Unlike the others who seemed resigned and controlled, these people had a different spark in their eyes, an expression of determination and resistance. They did not use the implants. Their faces were not displayed on screens. Their names were not in the system records. They lived hidden, away from society, as if they were criminals. Some were thin, with worn-out clothes and tired looks, yet there was something in them that I didn't see in the others. Life. They were few, but I knew they were important. The system considered them a threat, and I understood why. While everyone was blinded and asleep, these few saw the truth. I continued watching that group for a while, trying to understand how they survived outside the system. It wasn't long before I realized that they depended on each other in a way the rest of the world no longer did. While the people inside the system lived isolated, connected only by their screens and implants, those on the outside were still human. They helped each other, shared food, and cared for one another. They did not have access to markets, hospitals, or any type of service, but they seemed to find ways to survive. What was most impressive was that even facing difficulties, they had something that others did not: faith. I saw some kneeling to pray before meals, while others murmured low words, as if entrusting their lives to something much greater than themselves. Then I realized there was something strange in the air. It was as if a shadow loomed over that perfect city, something invisible yet present. Suddenly the big screens changed their broadcasts. The image of a man appeared. He was not an ordinary politician, nor a news anchor. His presence was strong, magnetic, almost hypnotic. His face was calm, his smile friendly, and his voice sounded soft, yet firm. He spoke about peace, progress, and unity. He said that the world was finally on the right path, that technology had eliminated chaos, and that everyone should accept this new era. But even though his words seemed reassuring, there was something in them that repulsed me. I couldn't explain why, but deep inside everything screamed that that man was not who he appeared to be. The most frightening thing was the way people reacted to him. They didn't just listen. They absorbed every word as if it were an absolute truth. Their faces, once empty and apathetic, now showed a kind of blind admiration. There was no questioning, no doubt. It was as if that man were the answer to everything, as if he were the definitive solution to humanity's problems. But inside me, a discomfort grew. It wasn't just what he said, but what I felt listening to him. It was as if his words were laced with something that deceived the senses, something that made people believe without perceiving the real danger behind that message. Then, suddenly, his eyes seemed to fix directly on me. It made no sense. I knew that I was not physically visible in that place, that I was merely witnessing everything in a way I couldn't understand. But at that moment, I had the overwhelming feeling that he knew I was there. A chill ran down my body, if I even still had a body in that state. He paused briefly, as if he were listening to something that no one else could hear, and then he smiled. It was a calculated, cold but perfect smile. And at that instant, I knew. He wasn't just a charismatic leader. He was something more, something much older and more dangerous than any politician or ruler. He was not there to guide humanity to a better future. He was there for something much greater and much darker. My instinct told me to look away, but it was as if something held me there, forcing me to face that presence. I wanted to believe that it was just paranoia, but every fiber of my being screamed that that man was not a simple ruler. He was in control of everything, and people adored him in a way that sent shivers down my spine. It wasn't respect, it wasn't trust, it was devotion. Then I realized that his image was everywhere, not only on the big screens, but also on posters, on badges attached to people's clothes, and even in the symbol I had seen before. This wasn't just a government, it was a cult where the majority didn't even realize they were being converted. Then something changed. The scene around me began to transform again. The lights of the perfect city started to flicker, as if they were being sucked by something invisible. The air grew denser, heavier. The people remained there, but now they seemed even more distant, like shadows of themselves. Then I heard a deep, echoing sound, like a thunderclap coming from within the very earth. Out of nowhere, the image of the leader disappeared from the screens, and for a moment, everything fell silent. Then, I heard a voice. It wasn't a human voice, nor something I could describe in ordinary words. It was something ancient, something that seemed to come from a place beyond comprehension. It said something in a language I did not know, but somehow I understood the meaning. Time is running out. The moment those words echoed within me, I felt a wave of dread overtake my being. Time was running out. But for whom? For me? For the people of that world? Before I could try to understand, everything around me began to shake. The city lights went out one by one, and a strong, almost supernatural wind swept the streets. People did not react. They remained still, staring at the darkened screens, as if they were still watching something that was no longer there. Then I noticed a subtle but terrible change. Their expressions were transforming. Those faces that had once been apathetic now seemed empty of something essential. Their eyes lost any trace of humanity, as if something invisible had drained their very essence. Suddenly, a new sound filled the air. It was a low, constant hum that seemed to come from all directions. I looked around, trying to understand what was happening, and that's when I saw them. Creatures. They hadn't been visible to the naked eye before, but now they moved freely among the people. They were shadows with distorted shapes, with no defined body, yet carrying a presence so oppressive it made me nauseous. They walked among the crowd, and with each person they touched, something inside them went out. There were no screams, no resistance. It was as if humanity were being consumed without even noticing. A deep despair took hold of me. I wanted to run, I wanted to do something, but there was nothing I could do. I was merely an observer in a nightmare that was becoming increasingly real. I wanted to believe that it was just an illusion, but it was impossible to ignore what was before me. People remained still, their expressions empty, while those shadows moved among them. But what scared me most was that no one seemed to notice. It hit me like a punch in the stomach. They couldn't see what was happening to themselves. It was as if they had surrendered, as if they were no longer masters of their own will. And then something even worse happened. From atop the buildings, I saw more of these shadows descending like vultures, spreading quickly, covering the city like a living fog. Their presence was overwhelming, suffocating. It was at that moment that I understood the truth. This was not just social control, it was spiritual dominion. Then a flash tore through the dark sky. For an instant, time seemed to stop. The shadows trembled, as if struck by something that wounded them. And then I saw it. A rift opened above the city, and within it there was an intense light, something that my mind couldn't fully comprehend. It was like looking at something that existed beyond time, something pure and unattainable. But the most impressive thing was not the light itself. It was what was inside it. I saw a portal, an immense portal of light that pulsed as if it were alive. And at that moment, I understood that this was the last chance, the final opportunity for those who could still see the truth to free themselves from that world of deception. But the problem was almost no one seemed to notice. The light of the portal shone with an intensity that made the shadows writhe and retreat. Yet, to my surprise, the people around continued oblivious to everything. They simply went about their routines, as if nothing were happening. Some looked up at the sky for brief seconds, as if they felt something different, but soon returned to the programming that seemed to control them. It was heartbreaking to see that. Salvation was right before them, but they were so trapped by the system, so blinded by deception, that they simply did not react. Then I realized that not everyone was completely taken over. Amid the crowd, a few people seemed restless. They were a minority, but they were there. I saw a man stop in the middle of the street, staring fixedly at the portal, his eyes filled with tears. I saw a woman holding her son's hand tightly, as if she had finally understood what was happening. These people still had something within them. something that the shadows had not been able to erase, but time was running out. The portal began to oscillate, as if it were about to close. The light pulsed faster and faster, and then I heard something that made my heart race. It was the sound of a trumpet, a deep and indescribable sound that seemed to come from all directions at once. The shadows went into a frenzy. They began to move uncontrollably, as if they knew something was about to happen. The people who were still trapped in the system didn't even seem to hear, but those few who could see began to run toward the portal. It was now or never. That was the decisive moment, and I knew that, for many, that would be the last chance. The few who started running toward the portal seemed to be fighting against an invisible force. It wasn't easy for them. Every step felt like a gigantic effort, as if the very air were too heavy. And then I saw something terrible. As soon as someone tried to break free, the shadows pounced on that person with fierce desperation, like predators preventing their prey from escaping. Some people fell to the ground, grabbed by these entities, while others seemed paralyzed by fear, unable to take another step. But those who persevered, they continued advancing, even stumbling, even while being chased. It was as if something inside them pushed them forward, a will greater than any obstacle. And then, the first ones managed to cross the portal. The moment they passed through the light, their forms became indescribable. They were no longer just bodies. They were something much purer, something that transcended any logical explanation. They had escaped, but the majority did not make it. I saw many hesitate until the very last moment, looking at the portal with fear, indecisive. Others tried to run too late, only to be pulled back by the very weight of their choices. It was agonizing to see. People who had the chance, who felt the call, but remained trapped by their doubts, their comfortable lives, the system that controlled them. When they finally tried to break free, it was already too late. The portal began to close slowly, and the sound of the trumpet echoed for the last time. The shadows roared as if they knew they had won. Then everything went dark. The portal disappeared, the light went out, and the world plunged into a terrifying silence. I wanted to scream, I wanted to do something, but before I could react, I felt as if I were being pulled back with an irresistible force. Everything spun around me, and in an instant I was no longer there. Suddenly, I was thrown into an absolute void. There was no light, no sound, no reference to space or time. It was as if I were falling endlessly into an invisible abyss. My heart, or whatever I had in that state, beat in a strange, accelerated, confused way. I tried to scream, but there was no voice. Then I felt something different, a presence. It wasn't like the shadows I had seen before. It was something greater, something that filled everything around me. Then I heard that voice again, the same one that had said time was running out. But this time, it spoke directly to me. Now you know. Now you have seen. Go back and tell what you witnessed. The moment those words were spoken, I was pulled back with an indescribable force. My entire body crashed against something solid. My lungs burned, as if I was suffocating. My eyes snapped open, and all I saw were white lights blinking, the sound of machines beeping, voices around me, hands touching me. It was only then that I realized I was back, in the hospital. My chest was rising and falling rapidly, my heart racing, and a nurse was shouting something to the other doctors. I was alive. After being dead for 11 minutes and 46 seconds, I had returned. But nothing within me was the same. My body might be there, on that cold hospital bed, but my soul still trembled from what I had seen. Because, unlike a dream or a hallucination, what I experienced was not something I could simply forget. Looking around, I saw familiar faces. My family was there, some crying, others looking incredulous that I was breathing again. The doctors looked perplexed. exchanging glances as if they couldn't understand what had just happened. But at that moment, none of that mattered. I could only think of one thing. I needed to tell what I saw. I needed to warn people. So I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, my voice weak. I struggled to form words. But everything came out jumbled, and soon the doctors began to calm me down, saying that I needed to rest. But how could I rest after what I had seen? How could I simply go back to my normal life knowing what was about to happen? In the following days, I tried to recount my experience to my family. I told them it wasn't just a near-death feeling, it wasn't a delusion, it wasn't a simple dream. I really was in another place. I saw the future. I saw what was to come. But, as I feared, they did not believe. My brother looked at me with pity. My mother said that maybe I was confused because of the medications, and my father didn't even want to continue the conversation. Even the doctors tried to convince me that it was all just my brain's response to oxygen deprivation, but I knew the truth. None of it was a trick of the mind, and it was in that moment that I understood something that hit me like a punch. No one wanted to listen. Even when faced with something so real, so urgent, people chose not to believe. That was the hardest part to accept. I returned with a sense of urgency I had never felt before. I knew that every second counted, that time was running out, and that people needed to be prepared for what was coming. But they did not want to listen. Every time I tried to explain, I saw looks of skepticism, discomfort, or worse, indifference. Some listened to me patiently, nodded, and then went back to talking about trivial things, as if I had told just a strange and unimportant story. Others looked at me as if I had gone crazy. Even among those who called themselves religious, I noticed a frightening pattern. They did not want to believe that something like this could happen now. They always said the end is near, some told me, but nothing really changes. That caused a tightness in my chest. They were blind, exactly like the people in that future I saw. Then I remembered the words I heard before coming back. Now you know. Now you have seen. Go back and tell what you witnessed. That phrase echoed in my mind incessantly. Deep down, I knew that it didn't matter whether they believed or not. I couldn't remain silent. I couldn't keep this only for myself. Even if they called me crazy, even if they ignored me, I needed to share what I saw. Because when March 2025 arrived, there would be no more room for doubt. The world would embark on an irreversible path, and those who could still see the truth would need to be prepared. That is why I decided to write this account, not to convince anyone, but to record what I witnessed, so that, when it all begins, no one can say they were not warned. Since I returned, my life has never been the same. I wake every night with that suffocating sense of urgency, as if something were rapidly approaching. I can no longer look at the world in the same way. I see how people are distracted, trapped in their routines, unaware of what is unfolding around them. Technology advances at a frightening pace, and the same ideas I saw in that future begin to spread around the world as if they were inevitable solutions. The narrative of security, efficiency, convenience. Everything is being prepared, layer by layer, exactly as I saw. And most people simply accept it without question. They have no idea what they are about to face. But what scares me even more is that the change is not only external. People's faith is becoming lukewarm, empty. I see full churches, but with empty hearts. Pastors who care more about comfort and acceptance than about truth. People who call themselves believers, yet are completely resigned to the system. And I know what comes after that. I know that when everything becomes mandatory, when there is no more choice, the majority of these people will accept it without hesitation. They will tell themselves that there is nothing wrong, that it is just progress. But I saw what happens afterward. I saw what this system really does. And I know that once inside it, something is erased. Something essential disappears forever. The hardest part is carrying this knowledge alone. I cannot simply go on as if nothing had happened. I know that most do not want to listen. I know they will continue calling all this a conspiracy theory, an exaggeration, madness. But deep down, it no longer matters to me. I saw. I know what is coming, and if there is even a chance that someone wakes up before it's too late, then I need to keep speaking. Because when people realize what is really happening, when they see that everything they accepted without question was a trap, maybe it will already be too late to turn back. I don't know why I was chosen to see this. I don't know why me, and not someone else. I was not a religious man. I did not seek that kind of experience, and honestly, I never thought much about life after death or about prophecies. But after what I've been through, I have no more doubts. God is real. The enemy is real too. There is a battle happening right now, a silent war for the soul of humanity, and I saw where it is taking us. I know many will ignore this warning. I know some will even laugh. But I also know that some, even if few, will understand, and it is for these people that I am writing this, so that when the time comes, they are prepared. March 2025 is approaching, and I feel it in the air. Something is moving, something invisible to the majority, but perceptible to those who can still see. The world is being conditioned, little by little, to accept what is to come without resistance. And I know that when it finally happens, everything will be swift. First, it will come as a brilliant solution, something that promises to solve the world's problems. But soon, it will become a requirement, a mandate, and those who refuse will be forced to choose between surrendering or losing everything. I saw that clearly. I saw how those who remained steadfast were persecuted, silenced, treated as threats. But I also saw something else. Saw that God did not abandon them. They were sustained, protected in ways that defy human logic, and that is what keeps me strong. Despite the fear, the uncertainty, the loneliness that this truth brings, I know I am not alone. I know there are others who also feel what is coming, who also perceive the signs, even without having gone through what I went through. And to those who still have doubts, I say, do not wait until it is too late. Do not be deceived by comfort, by the false sense of security. The world may seem stable now, but the storm is coming. You need to strengthen yourselves now while there is still time, because when it all finally happens, the choice will have already been made. I do not know what will happen to me after sharing this. I know many will call me crazy. I know some will say it was just a delusion, the result of my mind trying to process death. But I do not need you to believe me now. I just need you to remember what I am saying. When March 2025 arrives, and things start happening, I want these words to return to your minds. I want you, when you realize that reality is shaping exactly as I described, to know that there is still hope for those who choose to see. There is still a chance, but that chance will not last forever. If you have read this far and felt something different, if you felt a tightness in your chest or an inexplicable discomfort, please do not ignore it. Ask yourself why you are feeling this. Ask yourself why, deep down. Something inside you tells you that this might be true, because when the last trumpet sounds, when the portal closes forever, there will be no more time for regrets. I know, I saw, and now I have done my part.